1 minute ago, France has just unleashed a move so precise, so calculated, and so quietly devastating that by the time Berlin understood what was happening, the foundations of its influence across Europe had already begun to crack in ways that may not be reversible. Before we roll the footage, just one thing. If you enjoy our work, drop a like and hit subscribe. Over 98% of you are watching without subscribing. Let's change that right now. It's free for you, but it fuels everything we do. Subscribed? Perfect. Now, enjoy the video. This is not a loud collapse, not the kind that arrives with emergency summits and dramatic speeches, but something far more dangerous. A silent shift in power executed through law, timing and strategic patience. Germany is not simply facing opposition. Yet Germany is confronting the realisation that the system it built to guide Europe can now be used against it, and France has just proven exactly how. The moment that triggered this unfolding crisis did not occur under the bright lights of a press conference or inside a crowded negotiation hall, but in a controlled and almost clinical environment within the French Ministry of Economy, where a directive, carefully drafted over weeks of legal review and political calibration, was signed and immediately activated across multiple institutional channels. This directive, known internally as Directive Exceptionnelle 47B, was not designed to provoke an immediate reaction, but to initiate a chain of consequences that would only become visible once it was too late to contain them. So by the time the first signals reached financial analysts in Frankfurt, the mechanism was already in motion and the implications were beginning to unfold across markets, institutions and political networks simultaneously. For years, Germany operated under the assumption that its approach to fiscal discipline and centralised coordination had become the unchallenged backbone of European economic governance, reinforced by layers of agreements, institutional practices, and quiet alignments that ensured compliance without the need for overt enforcement. It was a system built not on force, but on inevitability, where each member state understood the limits of deviation and the cost of resistance. France, however, identified a vulnerability within that system, not in its economic logic, but in its legal architecture, and chose to act on it with a level of precision that caught Berlin completely off guard. The first public indication that something unusual was happening came in the form of fragmented reports, initially dismissed as speculative noise, but quickly gaining traction as multiple sources began to confirm anomalies in communication between French financial authorities and European institutions. Within less than an hour, major media outlets began referencing a specific phrase that would soon dominate headlines: a temporary suspension of compliance under a conditional fiscal alignment protocol. While the language appeared technical and unremarkable to a general audience, its meaning within policy circles was immediately understood as a direct challenge to one of the core mechanisms through which Germany maintained influence over Eurozone economic direction. What made this move particularly disruptive was the legal basis on which it was executed. France did not reject the framework outright, nor did it attempt to renegotiate its terms through conventional channels. Instead, it invoked a rarely used provision embedded deep within European treaty structures, a clause intended for exceptional circumstances involving national preservation and systemic imbalance. This clause had never been tested at this scale, and its activation introduced a level of legal ambiguity that effectively neutralised immediate countermeasures. Germany could not simply object without acknowledging the legitimacy of the clause, and it could not ignore it without risking a precedent that others might follow. As the situation developed, reactions began to emerge from multiple fronts, each adding a new layer of complexity to an already volatile scenario. Academic institutions, including prominent economists from leading universities, began analysing the implications in real time, with some describing the move as the first credible example of a member state asserting controlled autonomy within the Eurozone without triggering a full-scale institutional conflict. Others warned that this could mark the beginning of a broader shift where legal mechanisms previously considered dormant would be re-examined and potentially repurposed by other nations seeking greater flexibility. Public discourse intensified rapidly, and driven by social media amplification and continuous news coverage, as narratives formed around the idea that France had not only challenged Germany's influence, but had exposed a structural weakness in the system itself. The European Commission, faced with a situation that did not fit neatly within existing procedural frameworks, responded cautiously, emphasising the importance of institutional stability while refraining from directly criticising France's actions. This carefully balanced response, while intended to maintain order, was interpreted by many as an implicit acknowledgement that the move could not be easily dismissed or reversed. Within Germany, the internal response evolved from initial confusion to growing concern as more details became available, and reports began to surface indicating that certain advisory bodies had previously identified potential vulnerabilities in the fiscal framework, but these concerns had not been prioritised, largely due to the assumption that no major member state would attempt to exploit them. This assumption, now clearly invalidated, became a focal point of political debate, with critics arguing that complacency had allowed a preventable situation to escalate into a full-scale strategic disadvantage. Financial markets responded with measured but significant adjustments, reflecting a shift in perception rather than outright panic. Investors began reassessing risk profiles, not only in relation to France and Germany, but across the entire Eurozone as the stability of the underlying governance structure came into question. Bond spreads fluctuated, and currency movements indicated a subtle but noticeable recalibration of confidence, suggesting that the implications of France's action extended far beyond a bilateral disagreement. At the same time, France maintained a composed and controlled public stance, with leadership emphasising the necessity of aligning economic governance with democratic principles and national priorities. The messaging was deliberate, avoiding confrontation while reinforcing the legitimacy of the decision and positioning France not as a disruptor, but as a corrective force within an evolving system. This narrative resonated with certain segments of the European public and political class, further complicating Germany's ability to frame the situation as a unilateral challenge. As developments continued, attention shifted toward other member states, where signs of interest and potential alignment began to emerge. While no immediate actions were taken, the mere possibility that similar strategies could be adopted elsewhere introduced a new dimension of uncertainty. Governments quietly initiated internal assessments exploring the legal and economic feasibility of invoking comparable provisions and evaluating the potential benefits and risks of following France's lead. On the global stage, the situation attracted significant attention, with major international actors analysing its implications for broader economic stability and geopolitical dynamics. Observers in the United States and Asia recognised that shifts within European governance could create opportunities as well as risks, particularly in areas related to trade, investment and strategic partnerships. The idea that internal European mechanisms could be leveraged to alter power balances added a layer of unpredictability to an already complex global landscape. Back in Europe, institutional responses remained cautious as policymakers grappled with the challenge of addressing a situation that had no clear precedent. Discussions intensified behind closed doors, focusing on potential adjustments to existing frameworks, as well as contingency plans for scenarios in which additional countries might adopt similar approaches. The central dilemma was clear. Any attempt to restrict or override France's action could undermine the legal principles on which the system was built, while inaction could encourage further fragmentation. What is unfolding now is not a sudden collapse, but a gradual and potentially irreversible transformation. The system is not breaking apart, but it is being redefined piece by piece through actions that test its limits and reveal its underlying flexibility. Germany, once seen as the unquestioned anchor of European economic governance, is now navigating a landscape in which its authority is being questioned, not through direct confrontation, but through strategic adaptation by others. The coming days and weeks will be critical in determining how this situation evolves, as decisions made by key actors will shape the trajectory of European integration and influence the balance of power for years to come. Will Germany find a way to reassert its position without escalating tensions? Will France maintain its course or adjust its strategy in response to external pressures? And perhaps most importantly, and will other nations choose to remain within the established framework or begin to explore new paths inspired by what has just occurred? These are not theoretical questions. They are immediate, consequential, and still unanswered. Because what happened in the last 24 hours was not just a policy decision. It was a signal that the rules can be reinterpreted, that the balance can shift, and that control, once assumed to be permanent, can be challenged in ways no one fully anticipated. If this was the opening move, then what follows could redefine the entire structure of European governance. And the only certainty right now is that the story is far from over. Stay with us, because the next development may not just change Europe, it may change everything you thought you understood about how power actually works.